Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and really distill the most valuable insights to make you well-informed, fast. Today, we're plunging into what it truly means to engineer high-performance organizations, especially, for elite technical talent. Our mission for this deep dive is basically to explore the blueprint for creating an organization's greatest competitive advantage, and that's its ability to attract, develop, and retain the very best engineers. We'll be drawing from some really rich material, including concepts like the Talent Development Flywheel and insights from tech giants like Google, Netflix, Spotify, places like that. We're going to uncover how to build a culture that, well, truly thrives, how to architect a hiring process that's as precise as a technical spec, and how to rethink performance and career growth, all, through an engineering lens.
Yeah, and what's genuinely fascinating here, I think, is how the source material reframes talent management itself. It's not just a set of HR policies, right? It's presented as a core engineering discipline. It's about rigorous system design, continuous data analysis, iterative improvement, just like you'd approach building complex software. It's really moving beyond these disconnected tactics to building an integrated, self-sustaining talent ecosystem.
Okay, so let's unpack that foundational concept then, the talent development flywheel. We hear a lot about flywheels in business generally, but what specifically makes this one so crucial for tech organizations today? And what's often misunderstood about it?
Well, the core insight really is that today's competitive advantage isn't just, a proprietary algorithm or a patent. It's fundamentally an organization's ability to consistently attract, develop, and retain elite engineering talent. The flywheel is the strategic, integrated blueprint for exactly that. It's a self-sustaining talent ecosystem, a continuous self-reinforcing cycle. Think of it like this. Rigorous, thoughtful hiring increases talent density, meaning you bring in more top-tier people. Now, that higher talent density naturally fosters a culture of autonomy and high performance. It just does. This strong culture, then, combined with clear career paths and effective coaching, it becomes a magnet. It attracts even more top talent while simultaneously retaining the best you already have. And this, in turn, improves overall performance and engagement, which fuels the entire system again. It's this powerful feedback loop that, once it gets spinning, creates a really defensible competitive advantage.
That sounds like the absolute ideal scenario. But what's the most common trap companies fall into when they try to kickstart this flywheel? Is it like initial resistance to the investment? Or maybe misinterpreting talent density as just hiring a bunch of A players without the systems to back them up?
It's often a bit of both, yeah. But I think the biggest trap is treating the components in isolation, rather than seeing it as an interconnected system. Companies might invest heavily in hiring, right?
Yeah.
But then they neglect onboarding or career development. Or they talk a big game about culture, but don't embed psychological safety as a prerequisite. The flywheel only really generates momentum when all its parts are engineered to work together. And yeah, misinterpreting talent density as just stacking individual high performers without that cultural infrastructure for them to collaborate and grow, that's a sure way to burn them out.
Definitely. Okay, that clarifies it. What strikes me about this flywheel idea is how it genuinely elevates talent management to, well, an engineering discipline. Right. It's not just HR admin stuff. It's system design, data, iteration. Is that the truly groundbreaking insight here, framing people off as something you actually engineer?
Absolutely. I think so. It's moving beyond intuition and checklist HR to a data-driven, iterative approach. Just like you'd refactor code based on performance metrics, you should be refactoring your talent processes based on what the data tells you about retention, engagement, productivity, all that stuff. It's about building an architecture, not just, setting up departments.
Right. And when we talk about engineering that high-performance culture, it's easy to think about the surface stuff, the perks, ping pong tables, right? But the sources highlight something much deeper. Can you tell us about psychological safety and radical candor? Because they seem like opposing ideas, but surprisingly, they work together.
Yeah, it's a key point. We all know Google's research, like Project Aristotle, highlighted psychological safety as super important. For engineers, this isn't just about feeling safe to speak up in a meeting. It profoundly enables the rapid iteration, the candid feedback loops, the vulnerability you need for debugging complex systems and really pushing innovation. Without it, engineers often just default to safety, not innovation. They might hold back critical insights or avoid challenging flawed ideas, Radical candor, on the other hand, practiced famously at places like Netflix, involves direct, honest, often challenging feedback. But the key insight, and this is crucial, is that they aren't in conflict. Psychological safety is actually a prerequisite for productive radical candor. Without that underlying trust, that belief you won't be punished for being honest, candor just becomes destructive criticism. It backfires. So designing systems that actively cultivate this safety, things like blameless postmortems for outages, that's critical.
So it's not about just being nice, but creating a functional space for tough truths. That's a really crucial distinction. And it makes me wonder, if trust is so foundational, what kind of leadership fosters that effectively? The sources mention transformational and servant leadership. Are these totally distinct philosophies or maybe two sides of the same coin for building that culture?
Well, they're generally seen as distinct philosophies, but they're both vital and, yeah, often complementary in practice. Transformational leadership is more organization-centric. It's about inspiring people, aligning them towards ambitious company objectives through a compelling vision, challenging goals. Think of someone driving a huge platform migration, galvanizing everyone. Servant leadership, by contrast, is follower-centric. It prioritizes the individual's growth, their well-being, their empowerment. The organizational goals become almost a natural byproduct of having a thriving, supported team. Imagine a leader who focuses on removing impediments for an agile team, helping each member reach their potential. That's more servant leadership. The really important takeaway, I think, for anyone listening who's a talent architect or manager is not to just pick one. Instead, you should build a flexible framework. Train managers to understand both approaches and adapt based on the context. A startup manager might need to lean more transformational to ignite that rapid growth, right? While a manager of a stable senior team might be more effective as a servant leader, fostering deep expertise and autonomy. The most effective leaders, they fluidly shift between these modes if the situation demands. It's not static.
That adaptability in leadership sounds absolutely critical. And it makes me think, okay, even with great leaders, how do you ensure that flexibility translates into a cohesive direction across a whole organization, especially a large engineering one? Is that where frameworks like OKRs really come into play for strategic alignment?
Exactly. That's precisely the role OKRs play. Objectives and key results. They're essentially how a big engineering organization translates those massive, high-level business goals into tangible, trackable, day-to-day work. For individual engineers, for teams, think of it almost like breaking down a huge software project into epics and user stories, but doing it for the entire business strategy. So a company objective, let's say, expand into the European market, it cascades down. The engineering department gets its own objective, which is then informs individual team or squad OKRs. It connects the dots.
Aligned autonomy is such a compelling phrase for that balance. But thinking about an engineering team, what's maybe a subtle sign that the aligned part is dominating too much, that it's actually stifling the autonomy? Or, conversely, how do you stop it becoming a free-for-all where teams kind of lose sight of the bigger picture?
Yeah, those signs are subtle but really critical to watch for. Too much alignment, stifling autonomy. That often manifests as teams just waiting for directives. Or you see a lack of creative problem solving because they feel they're just executing someone else's plan. Engineers might start feeling disconnected from the ultimate business impact of their work, like cogs in a machine. On the flip side, too much autonomy without that clear alignment. That leads to duplicated efforts, pet projects that don't actually serve the larger mission, and engineers getting frustrated because their hard work isn't contributing meaningfully. The real power of OKRs, when they're done well, lies in leadership setting the what, those high-level objectives, but then the teams collaboratively determine the how, their specific key results, and the execution plan. This fosters ownership, it leverages collective expertise, but yeah, it definitely requires continuous communication and calibration to maintain that sweet spot, that aligned autonomy.
That makes perfect sense for keeping the whole system, humming along. Okay, moving into talent acquisition then. The sources introduce this really fascinating idea, treating the job description as an API spec. What exactly does that mean, and why is that level of precision so vital, especially for engineering orgs?
The API spec analogy really resonates, doesn't it? Just like an API specification defines clear inputs, expected outputs, error handling for code, well, treating a job description, a JD, as an API spec means crafting it with that same rigor and clarity. Think about it. If your API spec is vague, you get garbage in, garbage out right. Same logic applies to a JD. It forces hiring managers to precisely define the role's contract with potential candidates. What are the required inputs? The specific skills, the experiences needed. What are the expected outputs? The concrete responsibilities, the expected impact, and what's the operating environment? Tech stack, team structure, culture. This kind of disciplined approach, it dramatically improves the signal-to-noise ratio in your hiring funnel. It attracts truly relevant qualified candidates and, just as importantly, it efficiently deters poor fits early on. It's about engineering that initial filter to be incredibly precise.
That is such an insightful parallel. Really clever. It makes me wonder, though, what's one common mistake you see when JDs aren't treated with that kind of precision? What goes wrong?
Oh, the most common mistake is easily the wish list, JD. You know the one. It's just this generic laundry list of every possible skill or technology under the sun, instead of a focused definition of what the role actually entails day to day. This leads to just overwhelming numbers of unqualified applicants flooding the system. Or, sometimes worse, it scares away potentially ideal candidates who might not check every single box on that endless list, but are actually perfect for the core work. It just completely dilutes your signal.
Right, the signal to noise problem again.
Okay.
Okay, so once you have that perfect, precise JD, how do you actually find the right people? The sources emphasize sourcing top-tier talent beyond just, posting on LinkedIn and waiting. What does that proactive strategy look like in practice?
Yeah, that's key because top engineers are often passive candidates. They're not actively job hunting. So you absolutely need a proactive multi-channel strategy. A strong employer brand is crucial here. Really showcasing your company's values, the interesting technical challenges, the culture. Doing that through authentic content marketing, maybe open source contributions, community engagement. Transparency helps a lot. You want candidates to want to work for you before they even see a specific job posting. Make it aspirational. Other really effective tactics include robust employee referral programs. These consistently yield the highest quality hires, honestly. Strategic engagement with niche communities, attending or sponsoring relevant conferences. Competitive compensation, obviously. And crucially, really embracing remote or hybrid work options. That vastly expands your potential talent pool beyond just your local geography. It's basically about treating your employment offer as a high-value product that the best candidates actively seek out.
Okay, so you've attracted them with a great brand and a precise JD. But then the interview process itself often feels like, well, a minefield of inherent biases. How do you engineer an unbiased, structured interview gauntlet? One that truly evaluates skills and potential, not just gut feelings or whether you like the person.
This is so critical for fair and effective hiring because that unstructured, go-with-the-gut approach is notoriously unreliable and just riddled with bias. So you engineer a standardized, data-driven system instead. What does that mean? It means all candidates for a specific role get the same predetermined questions, and they're evaluated against a consistent scoring rubric. No exceptions. You use competency-based components, both behavioral, like tell me about a time you resolved a technical disagreement with a colleague, and situational, like how would you approach diagnosing a critical production security vulnerability with a really tight deadline? Standardized scorecards with clear rating scales are essential. Diverse interview panels having multiple perspectives helps counteract individual biases. And interviewer training is key. Training them to recognize and actively mitigate common biases, like affinity bias, liking someone because they remind you of yourself, or the halo horns effect, where one good or bad trait overshadows everything else. We're essentially treating human cognitive biases as bugs in the hiring algorithm and designing a system that's resilient to them.
And beyond those pure technical skills, which are obviously non-negotiable for engineers, how do you effectively assess for things like collaboration and team dynamics? And can you unpack this vital shift in thinking from culture fit to culture add? Why is that so important?
Right, because modern software development is inherently a team sport, isn't it? Technical chops are table stakes, but collaboration is key. You assess collaboration using targeted behavioral questions. Questions about teamwork, conflict resolution, communication skills. For instance, asking something like, describe a situation where you had to explain a complex technical concept to a non-technical stakeholder. How did you ensure they understood? Now, this shift from culture fit to culture add, it's a real game changer because culture fit, historically, often inadvertently led to unconscious bias. It favored hiring people who were similar to the existing team, leading to homogenous teams. And that actually stifles diversity of thought and innovation. Culture Add asks a different, much better question. How will this candidate's unique perspective, their different skills, their unique experiences enhance our team and make our overall culture stronger and more diverse? It's about building teams that are aligned on core values, sure, but are rich in diverse perspectives. And that's optimal for creative problem solving, for avoiding groupthink, for true innovation.
Okay, finally on acquisition, after all that meticulous work to find and assess and hire them, how does effective onboarding contribute directly to long-term retention and productivity? And maybe, what are companies often getting wrong or missing here?
Onboarding is absolutely the critical final stage of recruitment, and it's the crucial first step in retention. It sets the tone. What's often missing is treating it as a structured, ongoing program, not just a one-day HR orientation session. That's the biggest mistake. A really robust program includes things like pre-boarding, sending company swag, getting equipment set up before day one so they feel welcomed, a structured orientation that goes way beyond the HR basics, diving into technical setup, team introductions, initial project context. Assigning a buddy or a mentor is huge. Providing a clear 30, 60, 90-day plan with achievable early wins, like maybe getting a small piece of code shipped to production in the very first week, that builds momentum and confidence. And of course, regular manager check-ins specifically focused on the onboarding experience. A structured, supportive onboarding process, it significantly impacts long-term engagement and commitment, can honestly be the difference between a new hire quickly becoming a high performer versus someone who silently disengages and leaves within the first year.
Right, setting them up for success from day one. Okay, so once that talent is successfully in the door and onboarded, the focus naturally shifts to development and keeping them. We talked about OKRs for strategic alignment earlier, but how do they specifically drive individual and team impact for engineers on the ground?
Yeah, OKRs provide that clear answer to the why. Why are we building this question for every single engineer? An objective, remember, is that inspirational qualitative statement. And the key results are the quantitative measurable outcomes that show concrete progress towards that objective. So, for instance, an engineering team might have an objective like launch a rock-solid high-performance core application. Okay, great. The key results might then be things like reduce P0 production errors by 50%, or achieve 99.99% uptime, or decrease average API response time by 100 meters. Specific, measurable. The genius, again, is in that aligned autonomy. Leadership sets the high-level OKRs, the direction, but the team collaboratively defines their own key results and, importantly, how they plan to achieve them. This empowers teams, it fosters immense ownership, and it ensures that every bit of engineering effort is creating maximum business value. It also means, ideally, that OKRs shouldn't be directly tied to compensation or performance reviews. That encourages ambitious stretch goals without the fear of failure if you don't quite hit them.
This whole deep dive really circles back to valuing engineers properly. Now, one common frustration you hear about in more traditional organizations is that the only clear path to seniority, to more impact and compensation, is becoming a manager. How do these dual-track career ladders solve that challenge? And why is that such a pivotal shift for talent retention?
Oh, dual-track career ladders are a massive game changer for exactly that reason. They provide two distinct but crucially equally valued paths for growth. You have the traditional manager track focused on leading people, but you also have a parallel individual contributor, IC track. This means highly skilled senior engineers who love the technical work, who don't necessarily want to manage people. They can continue to grow in impact, seniority, and compensation. They can become staff engineers, principal engineers, maybe even distinguished engineers, deepening their technical expertise and architectural influence across the organization. This kind of framework provides real clarity and transparency for career progression. It details the expectations for skills, scope of impact, behaviors at each level on both tracks, and fundamentally, it demonstrates that the organization genuinely values deep technical expertise just as much as it values people leadership. That solves a major retention challenge because it stops your best technical minds from feeling they have to move into management simply to advance their careers. They have another path.
That feels like a monumental shift for many organizations, really validating deep technical skill. And speaking of shifts, let's talk performance management. The sources argue pretty strongly that the traditional annual review is, well, outdated, often biased, and frankly, pretty ineffective. How do high-performance organizations replace it with what's called a continuous performance dialogue? And what's the engineering approach to mitigating bias in that process?
Yeah, the traditional annual review, it's often this single high-stakes event, right? It's prone to recency bias, only remembering the last few months. It's anxiety-inducing for everyone involved. And it's just too infrequent to be truly developmental. So the modern approach is this continuous performance dialogue. It's built on frequent, lightweight check-ins like weekly or bi-weekly 1.1s between manager and engineer. And it incorporates comprehensive 360-degree feedback from peers, maybe direct reports if applicable, and managers. This provides a much more holistic, real-time view of performance and impact. And it significantly reduces the risk of single-person bias from just the manager's perspective. The goal shifts completely. It's not just about rating performance anymore. It's about continuously improving it. This transforms the manager's role from being a judge to being a coach. And to mitigate that ever-present unconscious bias, organizations implement structural safeguards. Things like structured feedback forms that require specific behavioral examples, not just vague opinions. Ongoing bias awareness training for everyone involved in feedback. And calibration meeting, where managers get together to discuss ratings and feedback to help standardize expectations across teams and expose potential inconsistencies or biases. You're essentially building a system, an engineered process, that's designed to be resilient to common human cognitive biases, ensuring fairer, more effective, and more developmental evaluations.
Okay, so much of what we've discussed really relies on having truly effective managers in place. How has the manager's role in engineering evolved from, just overseeing tasks? And how do organizations actively develop them into these coaches? Like Google's Project Oxygen famously discovered was so important.
The manager's role has profoundly shifted, yeah, from being primarily a task director or technical lead to being a coach of people. Google's Project Oxygen, which analyzed just tons of data, over 10,000 observations, made a pretty startling discovery at the time. Technical expertise, which everyone had assumed was the most important thing for an engineering manager, it actually ranked last in importance among the key traits of their most effective managers. Last. Instead, the best managers excelled at coaching behaviors. Things like empowering their teams, not micromanaging, creating inclusive team environments where psychological safety could thrive, being really good communicators and listeners, and actively supporting career development for their people. These are the essential enablers for that entire talent management flywheel we talked about earlier. It all connects. So training managers is crucial. Using models like SBI situation behavior impact for giving feedback is a common and effective technique. It teaches them how to deliver constructive feedback that is specific, objective, actionable, and focused on growth, not just judgment.
Okay, but what happens when things inevitably go wrong and an engineer is underperforming? How do effective managers approach that situation? It sounds like from what you're saying, it's more about diagnosis than immediate blame, almost like debugging a system problem.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it, debugging the system. Underperformance should ideally be seen as a system signal, not just an individual failure. It could indicate so many things, right? Maybe it was a hiring mismatch from the start. Maybe the onboarding wasn't adequate. Perhaps the expectations for the role weren't clear enough. Or it could even be personal challenges that the individual is facing outside of work. So a good manager's first instinct should be to diagnose the root cause, not jump to conclusions or assign blame. The framework usually involves, first, diagnosing the issue through empathetic conversation, maybe looking at data too. Then, setting clear, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, smart goals for improvement. Critically, providing targeted support and resources. That might mean additional training, pairing them with a mentor, or adjusting their workload temporarily. Following up consistently to track progress and offer ongoing support. And then, yes, when necessary, making those tough but fair decisions. That might involve a formal performance improvement plan, or PIP, usually developed in partnership with HR. It's designed to be a constructive process aimed at getting the system, the engineer within the team system, back to optimal performance. Whether that means supporting the individual to succeed or sometimes gracefully transitioning them out if it's truly not the right fit.
And finally, related to that, what about mastering those dreaded, difficult conversations? The ones so many leaders, frankly, avoid, which lets problems fester. How do you approach those effectively?
Oh, the difficult conversations. Yeah, the ability to handle these well is really a hallmark of a capable leader, especially in engineering where precision and, let's face it, directness are often valued. But you're right, many avoid them and the problems just get bigger. The key is having a structured, empathetic approach, almost like a well-defined protocol you can rely on. First, you prepare. Gather the facts, be clear on your objective for the conversation, and try to anticipate their perspective. Then, a highly effective model, like the one mentioned in the sources, is the observation framework. You set the scene calmly. You state your observation, what you saw or heard, and its impact factually, objectively, for example. Hey, I've noticed that in the last 3 sprint planning meetings, you haven't contributed any ideas during the estimation part. That's the observation. And the impact is the team may not be getting your valuable technical perspective, which could affect our accuracy. That's the impact. Keep it factual, not judgmental. Then, crucially, you listen actively to their perspective, understand their side, explore potential solutions collaboratively, don't just dictate. And finally, agree on clear, concrete actions and a specific follow-up plan. And that follow-up piece is often overlooked, isn't it?
Definitely.
How often do we have a tough chat, feel maybe relieved it's over, but then drop the ball on actually checking if the agreed actions happened? That follow-up is where trust can truly be built or completely eroded. Using a framework like this consistently helps create psychological safety, even in potentially high-stakes, difficult moments.
Wow, what a deep dive into building truly high-performance engineering organizations. It's become so clear that sustained success isn't really about, one charismatic leader or finding that one brilliant hire. It's about an intentionally designed, deeply integrated system, every component reinforcing the next.
Exactly. And if we just connect that back to the bigger picture, the flywheel idea, it's about understanding that every single component, from the way you write a job description to how you onboard someone to how you manage performance, it all pushes the next part of this cycle. Great hiring fuels the culture. That culture enables alignment and autonomy. That alignment drives growth and impact. And all of it is supported by effective coaching from managers. It's like a continuous integration and deployment pipeline, but for your talent. So what does this all mean for you listening? It means that thinking like an engineer about your talent strategy isn't just some clever metaphor. It really is the blueprint for building a self-sustaining engine of excellence. Something that becomes an enduring competitive advantage, almost like a living, breathing software system that continuously improves.
Yeah, which really raises an important question for everyone to think about. If you were to pick just one area from everything we've discussed in this deep dive, just one part of that system to engineer differently in your own organization right now to get the most leverage, which one would it be and why? Would it be talent acquisition, building psychological safety, refining career paths, or maybe leadership development? Where's your biggest bottleneck?
A great question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep asking the big questions.